Welcome to Salute Your Sports Week 26. Kamen Enchev, Drew Brackett, Tom Castleman. We've got a big show tonight previewing the national championship game, Gonzaga and Baylor. This is the matchup we've wanted to see all year long. This is the matchup we've been talking about all year long on the show. This is what we thought would happen. Week 1, Tom Castleman and I predicted Gonzaga to win it all, so it should be a great game tonight.
Absolutely, and of course, it's been a wild ride just to get to this point. We'll recap a little bit of what happened over the weekend as well, and certainly some exciting stuff, perhaps even something that we'll be seeing for years and years to come.
Yeah, looking forward to the big game tonight. And before we talk about the title game, what about that Gonzaga-UCLA game? It was just a multitude of epic shots, and of course, it ended on the buzzer beater from about half court by Jalen Suggs. But was it the best college basketball game you've ever seen, Kamen?
Yeah, so, I'll give you 3 games that come to mind first, and then we'll hear from you guys, and I'll give you guys my pick afterwards. But for me, this game obviously has to be in the top 3. You look at what a crazy game this was, going to overtime, buzzer-beating shot from almost half court, as you mentioned, Drew. 93-90, a lot of points in this game. 19 lead changes, both teams shooting over 55%, 15 ties. This game was up and down, and it was a game that, quite frankly, was played great by both teams. This wasn't Gonzaga choking. It was UCLA playing very well. A couple other games that come to mind, of course, Kentucky and Duke in the Elite Eight. I think it was in 1992. Christian Laettner hits the buzzer-beating shot to win the game by 1. That one was a huge game. And then Villanova-UNC from 2016. We have Marcus Page hit that crazy double-clutch 3, and then Chris Jenkins hits the 3 at the buzzer to win the national championship. So those are the first 3 games that come to mind. What do you guys think? What do you think are some of the greatest games before we pick our single greatest college basketball game ever, at least in tournament play?
Well, you certainly hit on 2 of the big ones there. Another one that we talked about a little bit earlier as we were talking about the tournament was the Hayward shot for Butler against Duke, where it was, very similar to the Jalen Suggs shot, but instead of banking in, it banked and rimmed out. So that's memorable for a different reason, especially the underdog team potentially toppling Duke. This is certainly up there as far as, one of the best shots we've ever seen, although I think I might give an edge to Chris Jenkins because I don't have the box score in front of me, but if I remember correctly, Villanova was actually down. So that was a win-or-go-home shot as opposed to, the game's tied. If Jalen Suggs doesn't hit this shot, it goes to another overtime, which would have been difficult, I think, for Gonzaga. Drew Timme looked absolutely gassed by the end of that game. But I think just in terms of, the pure pressure of it all, if Jalen Suggs happened to miss, relatively speaking, no harm, no foul, whereas with Chris Jenkins following up that Marcus Page shot that we thought was going to be legendary, so quickly erased by just a fantastic clutch play by Jenkins.
Real quickly, Drew can probably double-check this, Mr. Producer over there, but I am 99.9% sure that you did misspeak, Tom Castleman, a rarity on the show. I believe that it was a tie game when Jenkins hit the 3. Can we confirm this, Mr. Brackett?
Let's see.
Hold on.
Yeah, no, actually, so that game was tied. So in that case, we'll call it a 2-way tie then for both shots. That's how we'll put it.
Well, what about the game as a whole, though? Because I'm thinking more of the game. The shot, again, the shot's very hard, too, because for me, it's the shot's amazing, but what about the games themselves as a whole? And what do you think, Drew? What are some of the games you remember?
Obviously UNC Villanova is the one that popped into my mind Saturday night, when it was happening. But there's been some first and second round games, some upsets over the last few years. I remember an Auburn game. I can't remember who they were playing, but just a buzzer beater, and obviously it's early round, but it's still in the NCAA tournament. But as far as the championship game goes, this one was probably one of the best. I don't know what the largest lead was for either team, maybe 7.
7 for Gonzaga. And 6
which isn't
UCLA.
Yeah, which isn't too much of a lead. And so just the back and forthness and the evenness and the competitiveness of the game was really what stuck out in my mind.
Yeah, you hit it on the head for me there. That's why this game, to me, I thought is the greatest college basketball game I've ever seen. Because if you compare it to that UNC-Villanova game, UNC-Villanova was a lower scoring game. I think the final was 77-74. I may have to pull that up. I had that somewhere in my notes. But much lower scoring game. This game we had 93-90. That Villanova-UNC game had its own drama, but it was more like UNC took the lead, then Villanova came back, took the lead, then UNC rallied late. It wasn't back and forth like this game. I mean, it was something special because at no point was it like one team is taking the big edge. And when Gonzaga did go up 7 there in the second half, you thought maybe this game was over. In fact, when Gonzaga went up 5 with about 55 seconds to go, it's like, well, it's over. And UCLA came back. They kept coming back. And that's something that we haven't seen before. I do think the Duke-Kentucky game has to be up there for sure. But I don't remember that game for me because I didn't watch it live. I've seen a lot of tape of that game. But for me, this game resonates more because it was live. And Drew mentioned there's so many buzzer beaters in this tournament, but I think there is something special about it being in the Final Four on the biggest stage. And that also another reason why I would lean towards this game over Duke Kentucky. I know it was 2 legendary programs, but this game was a chance to make the championship. Also, keep in mind that it was an undefeated season for Gonzaga. Tom likes to talk about storylines a lot on the show. That in itself was a storyline. Jalen Suggs keeping the undefeated season going for Gonzaga, not to mention increasing his draft stock. And one of the key plays in that game was actually a defensive play, 2 defensive plays. One where Suggs gets the big block and goes all the way down the court with the, disgusting pass to Drew Timme for the dunk. And then we had Drew Timme taking a charge with 1 second to go in regulation. It was a good call by the refs, by the way, but if that goes as a block, UCLA is probably making the game-winning free throws. So just the sheer drama and everything that we had in this game, the back and forth, the high amount of scoring. This game had everything. So this is probably the best college basketball game I ever remember watching. And I know I'm probably caught up in the moment. I'm caught up in the hype. But it was that good. And that's the first thing that came to my mind after that crazy 3 from Suggs. So this was the best game I've ever watched, start to finish. I think the Jenkins finish might be slightly better because it was the national championship, but in terms of tip-off to finish of the game, this one was the best for me.
Yeah, it was certainly a really close game and really fun to watch. And quite frankly, inadvertently, the schedulers got this one right maybe because the earlier game in the day between Baylor and between Houston turned out to be a bit of a snooze fest over pretty much by the time the first half buzzer went off. What were some of your guys' thoughts on that game?
Yeah, I think that game, Baylor kind of took full control, and the Bears were making every shot that they were putting up, and Houston really tried hard to fight back, but Baylor just too many guys and too good of shooting for Houston to overcome.
Yeah, that's kind of what I talked about on the show when I was breaking down this game. I thought that Houston hadn't played a team as good as Baylor. We talked about it on the show. Every team they beat in this tournament was an upset team, a double-digit seed, and they played in a conference that certainly they didn't see teams like Baylor, Gonzaga, or even UCLA or Michigan, teams like that. So that game was not in the least bit surprising to me. I thought that Houston's lack of shooting was finally going to catch up to them, and it was 45-20 at the half. I mean, it was over before the second half tipped off. Credit for Calvin Sampson's guys for continuing to fight, making it look slightly more respectable, but certainly a big blowout there. And I think, Baylor hitting their three balls. When they hit their threes, they're close to impossible to beat, and they made 11 out of 24 in that game. I mean, guys, what to you guys was more surprising, the fact that Baylor won by this much or the fact that Gonzaga's game was this close? Because The closing lines, Baylor was only a 5-point favorite. Gonzaga was a 14.5-point favorite. And as Tom said, the schedule makers got it right, picking the right game in prime time.
Yeah, I think I'd have to say that the Baylor-Houston game was a bit more surprising to me. I mean, at this point with UCLA being, the second 11 seed to make it into the Final Four, I kind of figured like Gonzaga would win the game, but I thought that UCLA would do enough to keep it kind of close simply because that's what they've done against literally every opponent that they quote-unquote should have lost to, be it Alabama, Michigan, so forth. I thought that it was a bit surprising that Houston just didn't look like itself. They only got one more offensive rebound than Baylor did in that game. I thought they were going to be a much more physical team, and they just seemed completely surprised, maybe awestruck by the moment of being in the Final Four. I'm not quite sure what it was. In the second half, they made it much more of a game. They outscored Baylor by 6 points in the second half. So it's, I kind of wish going back on that game, like, what would it have been like if they'd brought that in the first half to get, perhaps two legendary games in one Final Four? That would have been great to see. As it is, Baylor Bears showed up to play from jump, and Houston did not show up until halftime.
Well, give credit to UCLA and Mick Cronin for, they're trying to slay Goliath, essentially, in Gonzaga, and they almost did. So give them credit for, just the game plan they came out with. They executed well and just came up a bit short. So, I mean, if you're UCLA and a fan and Mick Cronin, I think you're, overwhelmed with what the program did in that game against Gonzaga. But, yeah, Baylor just too much for Houston in that one.
Yeah, I think Coach Cronin is going to get himself an extension, and he's going to get himself some good recruits because UCLA is a brand-name program, and actually they're not supposed to be an 11 seed in this tournament. So had they had, early round exit in the first four, all of a sudden his job might be on the line. Instead now he's looking at a mighty extension, and given the tradition that UCLA has and the momentum they have now, you can bet that they're going to get some recruits, and we should be seeing UCLA in the Final Four probably sooner rather than later, I'm thinking. To me, I would say the Gonzaga game was a much bigger surprise. I was not in the least bit surprised that Baylor dominated Houston. I thought Baylor was a significantly better team. That result was about what I expected from the game, just because if Baylor starts shooting the ball, they are going to beat Houston by 19, 20 points because Houston simply couldn't keep up with them. I think that this UCLA game certainly was a surprise, given the fact that these guys were an 11 seed. I know they had a magical run, one of two first four teams to the Final Four, but they also played an extra game. They had two games in overtime before this one. Gonzaga came in 30-0, 29 wins by double digits. We hadn't seen them push this much this whole tournament, this whole season, and I actually think it's a positive for them because Baylor is not going to be a walkthrough. I mean, we're going to get into picking the game. I know you guys know I'm going to go Gonzaga. I might be giving it away, but I think Baylor should be a tough test for them, and I think they needed a close game like this. They needed a game where they were pushed to their limits, and I think that it was surprising that we saw it, but it was not surprising that Gonzaga ultimately pulled through in that game. Both teams only 10 turnovers, both teams shooting over 55% from the field. That was a magical game, but I don't think it really changes my outlook much on this national title game. I mean, having seen Gonzaga being pushed that much, I don't know what you guys think, but I think it's one of those games where you're going to get pushed at some point. Someone's going to get hot, and something's going to happen. So I actually think that game doesn't hurt Gonzaga's chances. It doesn't, change my perception. And I think Baylor is also a very good team. You don't get to the championship game by doubting yourself. So I think if I'm Gonzaga, I'm still feeling pretty good going into the title game.
Yeah, you have to feel good going to this point and overcoming some of the pressure. Like, we talked in the show last week leading into the Final Four, how, we commented on how Gonzaga seemed to be the only top-seeded team that didn't really run into any issues up to the Final Four. Well, they ran into an issue in a big way in this past game, And I think it's like you said, it's good for them to have to face that, to have to overcome that. That gets the juices flowing a little bit, especially when it comes to talking about the stars of your team, the top players. We saw Baylor have a pretty decent tune-up with their big three guys, and now we've seen Gonzaga have to respond in kind, and so that's going to be, I think, kind of the crux of most of the game. Of course, it can always come down to, in the end, some unsung hero, some lesser-known player hitting the big shot. But really, the bulk of the game is going to be between Suggs, Kispert, Timme for Gonzaga, and then Butler, Teague, and Mitchell for Baylor. They play a variety of different positions. It's going to be fascinating to discuss kind of who might have the edge in terms of the best three players on each team.
Yeah, it's tough. I think, Suggs, Kispert, Timme, you mentioned them, Butler, Teague, and Mitchell. These are two squads who have really good players, and not just those three guys, but just a deep bench. So it's just going to be execution tonight. I think that's an important part of this game. It always is, right? Limiting turnovers, making shots. I mean, that's the game of basketball, and, we'll see which team can get it done tonight.
Yeah, as far as the big three and who we think is better, I think it's a good matchup. I think if you look at Gonzaga's big three, they can combine for about 52 points. Baylor's big three, about 46.5. Of course, Baylor has three guards versus two forwards and a guard for Gonzaga, so it's no surprise that Baylor's guys get more assists, Gonzaga's guys get more rebounds. I do like Gonzaga's big three better just because, one, I mentioned that they do actually score more points, but I think they can score in more ways. I think Baylor's big three can drive to the hoop. They've got speed and athleticism, but they simply don't have the same type of size as Gonzaga to bang down low. I mean, Timme is a beast down low. Kispert is a good three-point shooter, but can also score down low. I think we saw him get that monster dunk in the Final Four as well. And Jalen Suggs is the X factor. I think he's the most athletic guy on the court of any of these six players. He's probably going to be a top three pick in the NBA draft for a good reason. And you look at where they have these guys scouted as far as the professional level. Suggs probably a top three pick. Kispert probably in that 9-10 range. And Timme second round, but his stock is moving up. So he's had 4 straight games or 4 tournament games with 20 points this season, and his statistics against the Power 5 teams are just out of this world. Meanwhile, you look at Davion Mitchell, more of a mid to late first round pick. Jared Butler, early to mid second round. Maceo Teague may not even get drafted. I do think he might go late in the second round. So you look at Gonzaga's guys, they have a little bit more of a ceiling. They have a little bit better size, and I think they just have more ways to get it done where if their three-point shots aren't falling, these guys are going to find a way to create.
Yeah, I give the edge to Gonzaga as well, simply because I don't know who Baylor puts on Drew Timme in the post. Baylor goes with a mostly small lineup, usually 4 guards and a forward, so that's going to be a big problem. I think Gonzaga, Jalen Suggs is the big star on the perimeter, but they have other guys, Nembhard and Ayayi, that can defend as well. They can kind of pick up some of the slack on Mitchell and Butler and Myers off the bench for Butler. He had a really good game against Houston. So I think Gonzaga has enough on the wings, even though it's not necessarily star power, to kind of mitigate what Butler's really good at. As far as the big three that goes, I mean, how are you stopping the stash with Drew Timme and, finishes with a dunk and does the full Fu Manchu? He's really fun to watch, and I think we're going to be seeing a lot from him tonight in what I think is going to be a pretty decently sized mismatch against Baylor.
Castleman, you love the stash. We talk about your adopted teams that you like. Well, your adopted mustache and favorite player is Drew Timme. That's the second time in the last week we've heard you talk about that mustache.
It's glorious. I actually hope that he goes a little bit more clean shaven, so it just stands out. He had like a bit of the scruff on the sideburns on the jawline. Hopefully he goes nice and clean, except for 90 angles, or 90 degree angles rather.
Are you starting to grow it there? Your own stash? Your own Timmy stash?
No, this is the strength of my facial hair game. I don't really do this whole bit of it well. This is just general laziness.
That's fair.
I thought you were inspired by Drew Timmy. Drew Brackett and I were thinking there was an inspiration. Instead, there's a lack of inspiration behind your stash.
It could be. I certainly could go for that. I very briefly, maybe for a matter of a few minutes, had a mustache once upon a time, and decided, should not be seen in public like this. But every now and again, just kind of mid-shave, just pause to see, consider, and then make the wise decision to move on.
Wow.
That's
love it. Well, going back to the game, who's got the better role players, Common?
Oh man, this is a great question because you take a look at these teams. Baylor actually has a deeper team. They've got a deeper bench. Gonzaga only played 7 guys in the UCLA game, so they really only bring 2 guys off the bench. But I think Gonzaga's 4th and 5th players, to me, are still better than Baylor's 4th and 5th players. I think we saw it in that game. Ayayi, the 4th leading scorer for Gonzaga, about 12 a game. He had 22 points, 9 of 12 shooting in a national semifinal, the biggest game of the season up to that point, and he was a real star. And Andrew Nembhard, their 5th leading scorer, well, we hit the clutch 3 with about a minute to go to put him up 5 points. So I think those 2 4th and 5th options for me, I like them better than Baylor's guys. I think you look at Ayayi, by the way, at about 12 points a game is better than Baylor's 4th leading scorer. I think Meyer is key shooting the ball. If he gets hot, he could be big for Baylor. I do think if the role players are very close, it kind of comes down to what we talked about back in the Super Bowl, as Tom Castleman likes to say. The Chiefs had the better top-end guys. The Bucks had more depth. However, basketball is less guys on the court than football. So I'm going to give a very slightest edges to Gonzaga's role players because I think their top 2 role players are better than Baylor's overall depth off the bench.
Yeah, I think I have to give the edge to Baylor's overall depth simply because, something I like to keep an eye out on is foul trouble. That's going to be something that happens through the game. Baylor is very good defending the ball. What happens if Mitchell kind of frustrates Jalen Suggs a little bit? Maybe gets an offensive foul picked up with a little bit of a push-off because Suggs is tired of having Mitchell in his pocket all the time. Who's the next ball handler for Gonzaga? I think that's something that's going to be really, really tricky for them to overcome. So usually when we talk about better role players, better depth, I'd like to go with a team that has a few more guys that can do it. I know they don't really have a frontline star player to match up with Drew Timmy, but Vital's been very good rebounding the ball as their leading rebounder. So they'll find ways to try to work around the edges. I think they have more experience with doing that. So I'll give an edge to Baylor's bench players, to their overall depth. But again, this is basketball. The best players can have the ball in their hand from one end of the court to the other. They have total control over everything that they're doing. So I still like Gonzaga better overall, but I think that Baylor's going to have a really tough test for the Bulldogs tonight.
Yeah, I guess we'll see how foul trouble plays into this game. Hopefully, it's the national championship. Hopefully there aren't many fouls. These 2 teams are the best in the country, right? So there shouldn't be too many fouls. So hopefully
let them play.
That's not a big – yeah, exactly. Let them play.
I hope the refs are not from the SEC because if you guys have watched SEC basketball, those SEC refs blow the whistle more than anyone else. I didn't get a chance to break down the officiating crew, but let's just hope they're not from the SEC because if they are, what Tom said could become a factor in this game.
No, hopefully it doesn't. But speaking of the factors, Common, what's Gonzaga's biggest key if the Bulldogs going to win this game?
I think their biggest key is going to be playing tough defense and getting up in Baylor's face when they're shooting the 3 ball. I think Gonzaga plays an up-tempo, up and down. They push the ball, so naturally all their games are going to be higher scoring. But you look at some of these games, their defense has at times been susceptible. Again, I think the UCLA game, especially in the second half, was more of UCLA hitting shots when they had to make a play We saw Timmy take a charge. We saw Jalen Suggs get a big block. But nonetheless, UCLA put up 90 points against them. West Virginia had 82, 88 for Iowa earlier this season. So if they have a small weakness, and I will say it is small because we're nitpicking, it would probably be their defense, and it would probably be giving up open looks. And you can't give up open looks to Baylor. I mean, I think if Gonzaga does what Gonzaga does, they're the team to beat in this game. But they're going to have to be tough and focused on defense, and they cannot give Baylor open threes.
I think it's going to be ball control for Gonzaga as being the primary key to victory. Can they get the ball up the court against a very stout, very aggressive Baylor Bears defense? One of Baylor's keys to successes all season long, all tournament long, has been getting turnovers. They get easy points off of those turnovers. They take possessions away from you with those turnovers. For a prolific team like Gonzaga, they'll be able to overcome turnovers as far as being able to score points. But it's in terms of giving up the easy buckets that they're going to have to be very careful of. I think three-point defense is another one. Baylor, the best shooting team in the country. A little bit of that's going to have to do with luck. You know, good shooting teams sometimes have cold nights regardless of how good the defense is. So I think the key for Gonzaga is to control what you can control, which is how you bring the ball up the court against a very, very staunch team.
Yeah, and I think Jalen Suggs, though, I think this is a game where all eyes are going to be on him, NBA scouts, the whole country. I think that he's going to be fine controlling the ball against Baylor. But, I mean, certainly if Baylor's going to win, they're going to have to create some turnovers for sure.
Yeah, so common speaking of Baylor's keys, that's your key for Baylor, just turn Gonzaga over?
I mean, I think that's a key, but the biggest key for Baylor is to do what they do, to shoot the ball as well as they possibly can. I think this is the greater sign. Last week I did 3 is greater than 2.
You were doing some sort of...
I messed up the greater sign, but this is the greater sign. 3-point buckets are more than 2-point buckets. Gonzaga is the number 1 field goal percentage team in the country from 2-point land. Baylor is the number 1 field goal percentage team in the country from 3-point land. Gonzaga, of course, first in scoring. I think Baylor is like 3rd going into the tournament in that 3-4 range. So I think for Baylor, they're going to have to knock down their 3-pointers. And they've been up and down this tournament. They've had some games where they've shot the 3 really well, and they've had some games where they didn't shoot it really well. Last game out, 11 of 24. They're going to have to make more than 11 to beat Gonzaga, but they're definitely going to have to shoot close to, if not 50%, to really have a chance in this game. So it's just going to be getting Butler, getting Teague, getting Mitchell, Meyer, all these 3-point shooters they have, getting their A game from that 3-point line. If they get their A game, this is a game that could go down to the last possession and could be an all-time classic. If Baylor's guys aren't shooting well, Gonzaga could win pretty comfortably.
Yeah, I think a big key for the Baylor Bears is going to be, very simple. Goes back to the grade school days of playing basketball. Box out. Nothing's more demoralizing for a good defensive team when they have a great possession, they force up a tough shot, and then they give up an offensive rebound, and that's going to be an issue with Drew Timme being as great as he is on the boards. You don't want to give up an easy 2 or a tip into him. You don't want him grabbing a rebound and then finding an open shooter, especially if it's somebody as deadly as Kispert. That's just going to really take the air out of your team. Defense is all about a mindset. It's really easy to lose that mindset if you're giving up easy second chance points.
Yeah, I think Baylor is going to have to really do well rebounding. And you talked about it, Tom. That's actually not one of their biggest strengths. Rebounding is sort of a minor weakness. Neither of these two teams have any glaring weaknesses. But if you're going to point out one, when looking at these matchups, for Baylor, it is rebounding. And I really do think Drew Timme is a double-double waiting to happen in this game. No problem. Jalen Suggs, also a very good rebounder as a point guard. And, of course, Kispert gets a lot of rebounds. So those little things do make a big difference in a game like this for sure.
Yeah, and, of course, we know that it's the players who are executing the plays and shooting the ball, but there's also some coaches involved, as we know, and it's a good coaching matchup. Scott Drew of Baylor and, of course, Mark Few with Gonzaga, who's kind of turned that program into a powerhouse program. So, Common, what do you think? You give the edge to Mark Few or Scott Drew?
Well, I think you know that I tend to not give positive things to people named Drew. It just hearing the name. I'm just picking on you. No, it's a great name. Drew Brackett, Drew Brees, Scott Drew, a lot of legendary Drews out there. But in this case, I'm going with the Few, Mark Few, that is, for the better coach. I think both of these coaches are great. Obviously, you get your team to the championship game, you're doing something right. I think both of these are two of the best coaches in the country. But simply watching the games, you take a look at how many easy shots Gonzaga gets, how many cuts, how many passes. They're the best shooting team in the country, field goal percentage-wise, especially from two-point percentages, because they get a lot of layups. They get those looks right at the rim. And that's not as easy as you would think, even with talented players. Some of that has to go to execution. And I think Mark Few's execution and game planning has been phenomenal. Also, you just got to look at the consistency. Drew, you talked about it. He's brought this Gonzaga team into a powerhouse because of what he's doing. Here's a trivia question. The last 2 weeks, I asked you guys both trivia questions. Here's a trivia question. When is the last time Gonzaga didn't win an NCAA tournament game? Not counting last season's COVID season.
A couple of years ago, then.
No, wrong.
I don't know specifics, so I'm going to say sometime in the 2000s.
It was 2007, 2008 when Stephen Curry went off for 30 points in the second half to narrowly beat Gonzaga that year, Davidson being a 10 seed, Gonzaga a 7 seed.
Oh, in the first round, I see.
First round. Yeah. Didn't win a single tournament game. Right.
Gotcha.
So I mean, that's just a motto of consistency. A lot of Sweet 16s in there, a lot of Elite Eights. Gonzaga was nowhere before he got there. I think in 22 seasons, I got to pull this up. I thought I had written this down a few weeks ago. But, I mean, he's gotten them in the tournament like every year except for maybe one. And you look at Scott Drew and Baylor, there's a lot of seasons where Baylor hasn't made the tournament. They've been in the NIT or they've had an early exit. This is, of course, his first Final Four. Mark Few was in the championship game a couple years ago. He's got that pedigree. He's got that experience on this stage. I trust consistency speaks to coaching. If we're talking about who's a great coach, how much of it is the coach, how much of it is the player, well, Gonzaga's consistency leads me to like Mark Few better in this game.
Yeah, for me, I think I'm also going to go with Mark Few. I mean, to me, it kind of comes down to like this year, both coaches have been great tacticians. They've been great for keeping their teams, even keeled throughout a rough season with lots of stops and starts. I mean, Baylor especially, you can't give enough credit to Scott Drew for getting his team back on track after they had a COVID layoff for a couple of weeks. But I'm going to go with Mark Few for the simple reason of he's been here before. A couple of years back, Gonzaga and UNC met in the championship game. He knows what this is like. He can impart that to his players. Nobody who was on that team for Gonzaga is on this team now. He's going to be able to bring that experience in a way that Scott Drew simply cannot. I don't know how tangible that actually is going to be, but I think that is the slightest enough edge over two coaches that have just been fantastic this season in the jobs that they've done.
Yeah, so two great coaches going to go at it here in just a couple hours. And, guys, we're only a few hours away now. Of course, Common, when you post it, it'll be a lot closer. But
sure.
In this game, who do you have winning?
Yeah. Oh, man, this is an exciting game. Again, we've been doing this Gonzaga-Baylor talk all season long. And this is what we've been saying all season long. I, by the way, had Gonzaga versus the field since day one, and they've been even better than I thought they would be. This is going to be a great game. I mean, it's exciting. It's the NCAA tournament, and we don't often see the two best teams in the country play in the title game. A lot of times, at least one of the two top teams does get upset. For me in this game, I do like Gonzaga just because they score more easily. They're less prone to grouts. They have the highest scoring team in the nation, the highest two-point scoring team in the nation. Baylor has a chance if they're knocking down their threes. We've talked about it. 42% from three, best in the country. But I think Gonzaga has too much size. They have too much teamwork. They have the experience of playing together. As Tom said, they've got a coach who's been in the national title game. They're 31-0 this season with 29 double-digit wins. The question was, what's going to happen if they get in a close game? Well, they delivered against UCLA. Despite what people may say, the game shouldn't have been close. Again, it was UCLA playing great basketball. Gonzaga delivered in that game. I think they delivered tonight. They're looking to be the first team to go undefeated and win the title since 1976 Indiana basketball and Bobby Knight. So Bobby Knight might be throwing a chair after watching the game tonight.
And the thing that's really wild about that fact is that they've actually expanded the field, I believe, since that season that Indiana went undefeated. So there's been more tournament games that Gonzaga has had to play in. I'm also going to go with the Bulldogs winning this game. I think, Common, you covered everything pretty well, but for me, I'm a sucker for storylines, especially, going undefeated. And then for, some personal storylines, we like to joke about how I have some adopted teams. I've picked Gonzaga to win the title I don't know how many times. They're the better version of the Belmont Bruins, the perennial upset team that never makes it out of the first round.
Much better version.
So I'm going to go with Gonzaga as well. I'm a fan of all their players. And they just, for the on-the-court stuff, the fact that, they've got a couple of lottery picks. Baylor doesn't have any. I mean, NFL or NBA talent doesn't always translate. We saw, Cade Cunningham, perhaps one of the best players in the country, certainly going to be a top pick. He didn't have as much success. We've seen other, almost pro players not have that success. I think that Jalen Suggs and the Gonzaga Bulldogs will taste success the same way that the Kentucky Wildcats did with Anthony Davis.
Yeah, now, I think. So go ahead, Drew.
I was just gonna say, looking forward to the matchup. Gonzaga was number one in the preseason in the poll, in the coaches poll or AP poll, whatever, and then Baylor was number two. So Gonzaga was number one, Baylor's number two. We don't get these kinds of matchups very often where the preseason number one team and the preseason number two team are playing each other in the national championship. So it's going to be Tom just went away, but it's going to be a heck of a ball game. The best two teams in the country going at it tonight.
Yeah, he's back. Don't worry. But I think you talked about it. I just talked about it. Number one and number two, and it's been almost wire to wire. Gonzaga's been number one, wire to wire. Baylor briefly went down to number three. Actually, they might have been number three in the last AP poll because I think Illinois might have jumped them. But they've been number two the vast majority of the season. And I like the storyline factor too, Tom. And we'll get into the statements of the week in a second, and I'll have.
But remember, this game. Sorry to cut you off. Remember, this game was going to happen actually in December, but it was called off due to COVID, and I think it was actually going to be in Indy too. So just kind of it's full circle.
The game that we missed out on, we get to see it on the biggest stage, and I actually think that this probably helps Baylor a little bit. The fact that they didn't play. Because they don't have tape directly against each other. And I think Baylor is the worst team. Obviously, in a one-game scenario, Baylor can absolutely win this game just because of how well they shoot from three. But Gonzaga is the better team. But this isn't a 7-game series. And the fact that Gonzaga doesn't have the tape of Baylor going up against them, I think maybe gives Baylor a little bit of an edge with the fact that they didn't play that game. But I think this is going to be a fun national championship game. And we don't have our locks of the week this week. We picked it last week. We're more making this our March Madness special, so we'll have our locks of the week next week. But you might want to lock in over 160 points because I think this has the potential to be a high-scoring game. Both of these teams play a tempo where they like to push the ball. They like to shoot the ball. Baylor isn't going to walk the ball up the court and minimize the possessions. That's not the style they play. That's also not the style Gonzaga plays. So I think we could have a game similar to Gonzaga and UCLA that we saw, a high-scoring shootout. I'm just not convinced that Baylor is going to make quite as many shots as UCLA, but they certainly have the potential to do that, and I'm excited. Number one versus number two, it's going to be a really, really good game tonight.
Absolutely, and so that's the men's game, of course, but don't forget the women's game. We had the Final Four on Friday, those games, and then the title game. It was Stanford against Arizona, an all Pac-12 final. That was last night. What do we think of the games this weekend?
Yeah, first off, what about the Pac-12 in the men's and women's tournament? We had an all Pac-12 final in the women's tournament with a Pac-12 champion, and we had the most Elite Eight teams out of the Pac-12. And gosh, the way UCLA played on Saturday night, they would have beaten any team in the country but Gonzaga. So had they matched up with Baylor on the opposite end, we could have, UCLA in the championship game. So, but as far as the women's final itself, what a great weekend of games. Just a lot of close games. We had Stanford beating South Carolina by 1 point. We had Arizona upsetting UConn, and then we had a 1-point game in the national championship. I have no idea what type of look Arizona got at the end there. If you guys saw it, like a 3-pointer with 3 people in your face, down 1, and they had time to set up, a play, get something of a better look. So I think the last shot has to be disappointing for Arizona, but certainly only losing by 1 point was impressive, and just a lot of March Madness on both sides, a lot of close games in March and April, and it was exciting.
Yeah, it was really exciting, especially to see a little bit of some underseeded teams or lower-seeded teams making it so far in the tournament. Arizona, a 3 seed, making it within 1 shot to winning the championship. I think the statistic is it's twice that the men's basketball season has had an undefeated team start to finish. I think it's happened 7 times for the women. So usually, and we talked about this earlier in the Madness, women's teams, usually the higher seeded team is much more likely to advance. There are far fewer upsets in the women's tournament, and Adia Barnes for Arizona, their head coach, just did a fantastic job, upsetting perhaps, the best team with the best player in the country in UConn and Paige Beckers. So just a fantastic job for that. I know towards the end of the game it was, if you want to say, it was marred a little bit by some not great execution by either team going down the stretch. Certainly kept it very exciting, so a lot of fun to watch.
Yeah, real quickly, Tom, I think the stat you're referencing, that must be something since they've redone the field or something. Mm-hmm. What was it? Because I think that's what it is, because I think there are a lot more undefeated teams on the men's side, but a lot of them were pre the redoing of the NCAA tournament, where there were less games, less teams to go through type scenario. Just to make that clear.
Yeah, that sounds about right. It's once they kind of re-expanded the field. That's what the difference has been.
I think there were teams back in the day like San Francisco when Bill Russell were going undefeated, UCLA and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Bill Walton going undefeated. But I think they had less teams in the tournament back then. So you must have. I just want to clarify it. Like since
for sure.
a certain era, for sure within the last 30 years, we can definitely say that. Factually.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the women's final Sunday night. It was just a classic game between Stanford and Arizona. And Arizona, of course, the 3 seed. Stanford, the number 1 overall seed in the tournament. And, it was back and forth, really. Stanford kind of took control, but Arizona responded. And sure enough, in the fourth quarter, Arizona had the ball trailing by 1 with a chance to win and just missed the shot. So, another classic basketball game last night.
Yeah, and Arizona rallied in that game. They were down earlier in the game, and they rallied to make it close, so that was exciting. Let me ask you a question, Drew Brackett. This is for you. Since you love the low-scoring games in football, do you also like a low-scoring basketball game?
I think you're comparing apples to oranges, right? I think it's completely different because in basketball, yeah, you're missing shots, but I don't know. I don't know if it gets I mean, it doesn't get boring to me just missing shots in a basketball game. One would say that's really good defense, or the offense is just off that night. But I don't mind a low-scoring game at all.
I definitely am a high-scoring guy. That UCLA Gonzaga game was really doing it for me. But that response does not come as a surprise to me. I just was thinking, and I think I mentioned it last show, but that Michigan UCLA game where no one can make a shot, like it just reminds me of that LSU Alabama football game we remember watching in college where it ended 9-6, and I was furious. And Drew Brackett said that it was some of the best football he's ever watched.
Oh yeah, that was a great game. The game of the century, 9-6. It was incredible.
What about you, Tom? Are you a points guy in basketball? Because I'm a points guy in everything but baseball. I like what pitchers do in baseball, but otherwise, I prefer the points as long as they are playing some defense. Now, if there's no defense being played, then you lose me a little bit. But certainly in this level, the Final Four, the championship, I think we do see some defense for sure.
Yeah, I think for me, it's more about the pace of the play, because you can have like the thing that really aggravates me are just like empty possession after empty possession, where a team runs down the clock to the end of the 30 seconds, has a bad contested long 2-point shot, and then the other team goes and does the same thing. So, I mean, I'm okay with a lower scoring game if both teams are playing at a slower pace and just have really smooth, clean, crisp offense. Not something we get a whole lot of in college basketball because not very many of these guys will be going pro, but that's the kind of game that I like to watch. I don't like a track meet up and down the floor, but I also don't like a brick fest for sure.
Yeah, I like the track meet. I think this is going to be a track meet. I mean, you're thinking we'll see a lot of points tonight, certainly?
Oh, yeah. I think it's definitely both teams are going to reach 70. First to 75 wins or first to 85?
Oh, it's definitely minimum 80, probably 85, just because the over-under was 158, and I think it moved to 160. So I think you got to probably hit 80 points to win. I don't know that 75 is going to be enough. I mean, Gonzaga's probably not hit 75 only a handful of times all season. I mean, these guys could hit 100. That's how good they are when they're on. And I think this is going to be more of a track meet. I think you need 80, 85. Dare I say 90 points to win this game?
Jeez.
It'll only be fun to see.
In an NBA range.
Yeah, and hey, we got the NBA talent on the floor. Might as well execute it for us. Guys, though, let's get into our statements of the week. So, again, we're going to hold off because there are locks of the week. So we'll make locks. We're going to recap the national championship game tomorrow probably or later this week. So we'll give our locks of the week then. I did have a good week again. Drew Brackett, not so much. I don't remember exactly how Tom did, but we'll talk more about that.
He only remembers mine.
We'll talk about that tomorrow. But statements of the week. What do you guys think? I don't know, just about college basketball, this tournament, just anything that you guys feel passionate about in the college hoops world, or maybe something else if you want to go for it.
I mean, for me, it's just a salute to everybody in Indy and at the bubble, right? I mean, this whole tournament has been in a bubble, and it's been well executed. We had that one cancellation with VCU in Oregon, but that's it. So, hats off to the NCAA, the players, the coaches, the teams. It's been really, I think, a well-run tournament. And, of course, we got to the finish line here tonight, and, looking forward to a great game.
Yeah, I think I've covered just about every statement to possibly make about the game itself, so I can only echo, Drew, what you have to say. I mean, it's the players, the coaches who sacrificed to be here. It's also all the people who were working around the stadium to make the living arrangements and all the other accommodations as safe as possible for the players. We only had one game canceled. It was in the first round, so not terribly impactful on the rest of the tournament. So yeah, just a big salute to everybody who made this happen. And the statement, I guess, can be that we're going to have a really, really fun game to watch tonight.
Yeah, I think minus the whole thing with the weight room, the women's team not getting as good, significantly worse conditions than the men's team. Everything has gone smoothly. I think we had to expect one COVID case. Thankfully, it came in that first round, like you guys mentioned. This also, to me, if you think about it, the first major sporting event in America, at least, to get canceled was the NCAA tournament. We had it just over a year ago amidst this pandemic, and I think this sort of comes full circle. We completed, we went through the NBA, MLB, NHL, all the WNBA, MLS, NWSL. Then we had the Super Bowl with football, and kind of the last one missing was that college tournament, and we are going to complete it tonight. I'm also looking forward to One Shining Moment. It's one of my favorite traditions in sports, the song they play at the end with all the cool moments and everything that we've seen. My statement, though, is going to be that this title game is going to be sort of a changing of the guard as to who the top dog in college basketball is. I think it's Gonzaga. They're going to win this game, and they're going to be regarded as a top program in college hoops. And really, they've been doing this for the last 20 years without the top recruits and without the national championship. Well, this year they got Jalen Suggs, the truly first time they've had a top 10 five-star level recruit, I believe, in program history. Well, after Jalen Suggs and his Gonzaga Bulldogs win the championship tonight, I think we're going to see a lot more of those recruits. They may not have the number one class, but they will certainly be able to compete with the likes of UNC, Kentucky, and Duke. And since they may get guys who stay a year later, they're going to be the top team. And I think people are going to start noticing, I don't know if it's Spokane or Spokane. It's like Gonzaga,
Spokane.
Gonzaga. It's Spokane?
Spokane.
No, Spokane.
Spokane. That's what I thought it was, Spokane. So Spokane, Washington, all of a sudden is going to become a hot spot for college basketball talent. I think we live in a social media world. It's the same thing we see in the NBA. It used to be that you had to play for a major market team to get noticed. These days in sports, with social media, with the television packages, you don't have to play in a New York. That's why a team like the New York Knicks, albeit they're doing better this year, they can't get the same talent that they used to get. Same for the Chicago Bulls. It's not the same sort of aura around them, and I think Gonzaga is getting its own sort of aura, and I think they're going to be here to compete with UNC, Dukes of the world, Kentucky's, and I think this is going to be the top team in college basketball, at least while Mark Few is there, and I expect in the next 10 years, I don't think anyone's going to win more regular season games or more title games than the Gonzaga Bulldogs and Mark Few. And finally, as Tom said, it's a storyline. All they're missing is the national championship. That's all they're missing, and I think they get it tonight.